And we are live. Good evening, everyone. Welcome for tonight's Live Viviana live stream. And tonight's topic is how to captivate your audience with the storytelling. Again, thank you so much for finding some time this evening to joining our live discussion. You know, it's another gorgeous evening here in Melbourne. Summer is here. 2020 is almost over. I guess you're all doing Christmas shopping at the moment and having a Christmas party. But look, I'm really glad if you're actually joining me tonight because it's the last episode this year. Yes, last episode 2020. So please, I know time flies. So please make sure you introduce yourselves in the comments. Let us know what you do and join our conversation with your comments and questions. So if you're new to my live show, I'm Yana Martins and I'm a video confidence coach. I help my clients to overcome camera phobia so they can connect with their professional community online through power of the video. So again, tonight we're going to talk about how to captivate your audience with storytelling. And Emily is going to share her top tips, how to the ability to engage and influence people with your story. So overall, today's discussion is about the engaging with your audience and resonate with your audience. And also we will discuss what can be, different when we're engaging with our audience face-to-face and online as well. So anyway, it's incredibly relevant topic, especially, in today's world. So please make sure you tag or share it with your friends or whoever need to hear this information. So before I'll pass it on to Emily to introduce herself, I'm just going to quickly remind you that we're going live on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. So to watch the replays, please subscribe to my YouTube channel or follow hashtag LiveViviana on LinkedIn. So I'm going live every Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. Melbourne time with various experts from my network talking about all the things effective communication, LinkedIn, personal branding, and content marketing. So we are going to answer all your questions from all the platforms. Please make sure ask as many questions as you want. So stay on the topic, yeah. And most active participants will also receive a nice surprise at the end of the stream. So again, make sure you introduce yourselves in the comments. Let us know where you're watching us from. And Sabine is here, introducing myself. Hi, Sabine.
Hi,
And I'm gonna pass it on to Emily to introduce herself. Please, Emily.
All right. Hi, everyone. So my name is Emily Edgeley, and I'm a public speaking coach for the tech industry. So what does that actually mean? That means that the people that I help are generally people like engineers, coders, testers, people from cybersecurity, something like that. And what I do is I help them get from a place where they either don't feel they're any good at presenting or they dread presenting to a place where they can enjoy it and they can be engaging and interesting and truly influence people when they present. So that's essentially what I do. And I help people, whether it's at work, just a meeting or an update, or all the way through to large events and conferences.
Perfect. And I guess before we dig into the content tonight, I actually want to ask you guys who's listening to us tonight, how many talks or presentations have you heard in 2020? Maybe like live webinars or different ones. So let us know how many talks you think you heard in the last year. And the most important part is actually how many do you remember? Because I'm sure we've been in a lot of conferences, this year maybe not that many conferences, but online conferences, and heard so many presentations and speakers. And now if I'll ask you, oh, what did this speaker what was this figure talking about? And you're like, I have no idea. I don't remember. I just remember his name and that's it. So look,
I know, because I know,
I'm trying to answer this question myself.
Yeah.
I'm just
actually, for you, how many, even in your life, how many do you think you could remember in enough detail that if I said to you, Yana, recount the presentation word for word almost, how many could you recount?
Oh, I can't recount, like thousands.
But could you tell me what they told you? Could you share the details of the presentation?
Like, you put me on the spot. I'm thinking like what it could be. Obviously, yeah, I know what it means. Obviously, I listen a lot to my guests.
Yeah, you don't have to share the
and I'm just
actual
thinking which one was the best. Like, I'm just trying to think about, who really like got my attention this year. I guess Karen was the best one.
Yeah.
The LinkedIn lady.
Oh yes, I've met Karen.
Yeah, you know Karen. Yeah. So I think Karen's presentation was the best this year. That's the one that I probably remember in the details.
Yeah. So whenever I ask my clients this, or whenever I do a workshop, inevitably people will say they've been to maybe hundreds or thousands of presentations in their life. And then when I ask them how many they remember, they're lucky if they remember one or two. And when I ask them why do they remember those presentations, almost always it's because that person shared a story. And so, it really proves that a story is so memorable. And I could even recount to you a couple of stories I heard 5 to 10 years ago, and I can tell you them almost word for word. And I can't tell you any of the other presentations that I attended. Like maybe the topics, yes, but what actually got, what the messages were, I wouldn't be able to tell you.
Yeah, 100%. And Fabian is saying he likely around 5-10 talks and conferences that he's actually remember.
Yeah.
So obviously we hear way more and remember just a few. But when you said about these stories, for some reason, it's a bit off the topic, I think, but the one book really came into my mind. This the subtle way of not giving a fuck.
Oh yes.
So that whole book has actually stories. And what I actually really like, I remember stories from those books as examples way more than actually what the whole book was about. So I think that would be like a really strong example of because the whole book is just a little stories, and you really remember those examples. Then he trying to paint a bigger picture about what's actually been what sort of information he was trying to
get across.
Yes.
Yeah, 100%. And if you do any research on things like the Guinness record holders for memory champions, they will all use the power of a story to help them remember ridiculous things, like someone has remembered over 65,000 digits in a correct order. I mean, like, doesn't that just blow your mind? And the way that they do it is attaching a story to the numbers, because our minds work in pictures and stories evoke a picture for us. So yeah, I mean, that's just one of the reasons why stories are so powerful, because they really stick in people's minds.
Yeah, definitely the power of association. So Emily, tell us what actually makes a difference between a good story and a bad story.
Yeah,
how we actually can master this storytelling. So where we will start.
Yeah. Okay. So I like to use a bit of an analogy that describes the difference between information, which is what we generally share, especially in the corporate world, versus a basic story versus a great story, or what I call sort of an epic story. So if you think about it, I like to think of information is like fast food. It's easy to go grab something like McDonald's, right? It's cheap, it's quick, you can get it in an instant, drive past, you don't even have to get out of your car, but it's not very good for you. So you might want to get it, but the result isn't that good. When you've eaten it, you might think, oh, I feel so full. That's a bit like sharing information with people. It doesn't make much of an impact. However, if you can then think about, the next option would be creating a stir fry. If you home cook something, you might have some really basic options that you can do without thinking about it. That's like a basic story. And a basic story, if you think about it, the things that are in a basic story are things like characters is a really, really basic thing that a story needs to have. It needs to have events, like something obviously needs to happen, and there needs to be an element of time, but that's pretty much it. Like we're talking a really basic, stir fry. And then if you think about it, okay, well, what's the next option? An epic story to me is like fine dining. You're not always going to want to pay and go to a fine dining restaurant. You'll want to do it when you want to impress someone, right? Or on a special occasion. And that's the same with an epic story. It takes longer to pull together. It takes longer to get all the elements. It's probably going to take longer to actually tell the story, probably like a fine dining, like 7 degustation menu. But when you eat out at fine dining, it's an amazing experience. So the impact there of an epic story is much more. So what is in an epic story is a few more ingredients, right? So what you want to think about to make a basic story great, you want to add a few things. So you want to make people care. So yeah, that's the basic one. So you want to make people care essentially about the characters. So when you're telling a basic story, you might sort of skip over some details. You might be doing it on the fly. Whereas a great epic story, you want to get people invested in the characters. So in your story, you would want to have some things like conflict. So you'd want to have some sort of a rise and a fall in the emotion that the characters feel. If you think about, any a good, sort of cartoon movie as well, like a Pixar movie, something bad always happens to the characters, and sometimes over and over again, and maybe they find their way out of it, and then there's another tragedy. So it's a little bit like that. If you're wanting to tell an epic story and you really need to influence people and you've got a bit of time to prepare, you want to get them invested, say names of characters, make sure there's conflict, and really draw on the emotion that the characters are feeling. So that's one element. Another element that you want to make sure you've got in there is that people can visualize the story. So you want people to feel like they're in the story as well. So if you think about the 5 senses, you're really wanting to describe the setting. You're wanting to describe the scene. Is it starting in a boardroom where there's people, men in suits around a round table and it's bright lights? Or does this story start, is it much more of a personal one where you're recounting back to your life, where you were sitting on the tiled bathroom in your house that you grew up in? So if you can help people actually feel like they're there by using the descriptive language and the 5 senses, that will make it much more impactful. So that's the second thing, which is in that epic story. And then the third thing, which is in the epic story, it's sort of what's in it, but it's also what you don't put in it. It's make it simple. Now, if you think about, when you're creating an amazing meal, you don't want to put heaps of competing ingredients in it, right? Like that's just too much. You want something to sort of hit, a hero of the dish. It's a little bit similar like that with the story. You don't want the storyline to go off on so many tangents that people cannot follow and they can't make sense of it. So make sure that there's a connection between the events that happen in the story. So yeah, hopefully that analogy works in that you can understand, like, it's easy, like storytelling a basic story is like you can do it on the fly. It's sort of quick and dirty. It's simple. It's going to get you a much better outcome than information, but there's still a better version, which is that fine dining sort of epic story version.
Actually, while you were talking about, I was thinking about another comparison. When you mentioned that keep it simple as a fine dining, how sometimes you go to a buffet and it's still fine dining, but you just eat like bits of pieces and you don't get the satisfaction because you just want to try everything and you just full in the so I guess that's about keeping it simple, keep it all in line. The Sabine, actually have a question for you. What kind of memorable stories have you used that are different from like hero journey?
I don't even use, like, the hero's journey isn't even in my like repertoire. So given that my clients are generally very technical, that's sort of not in my repertoire. A lot of times what I try and think of is there's two different types in my mind of like reasons why you would want to tell a story. So you'd either want to tell a story to inform people, or you'd want to tell a story to influence people. And generally the informing one is sort of aligned to that more the make that food at home, the home cooked meal, because it's, if you're informing people, the stakes aren't generally as high, right? And so you probably put in less effort, and that might be a good one if you're just thrown into a meeting and someone says, tell me about an initiative. You can tell the story of the initiative rather than the facts of the initiative. However, on the flip side, if you're wanting to influence people, you're generally wanting a specific outcome, right? Like you might want to get specific behavior change from people. You might want them to change the way they're approaching something than what they're doing now. Or maybe you're wanting to get approval for something. So in those cases, you would want to really put in some effort into that particular story. And to me, the story needs to fit specifically with the point that you're trying to make. So for me, there's two ways you can do storytelling in my mind. You can start with the story and then find a point for it. Do you know what I mean? Like, you don't just want to tell a story for no reason. So you can sort of reverse engineer it. But the way I generally like to do it is because, in the workforce at least, you generally have outcomes. You have a point you're trying to make. You're trying to help people understand like a new strategy, or you want them to understand that something you've just implemented, or maybe you want them to understand what you do. So you need to start with that point and then find a story. So for me, it's not so much about, that the hero's journey or what have you. It's just more, what's the most important thing is that connection between the point you're trying to make and the story is very, very strong. If you tell a story that's sort of on a bit of a tangent that people can't connect to your point, then it's really going to fall flat and it's almost going to do worse than information. So I would say to make it more memorable, it's definitely going to be one that you have experienced if you can share that one. And if we have time, I can talk about the other types of stories that you can source if you're, stuck like, oh, I don't know, where do I get a story from?
I know, and I think a lot of people are thinking exactly this, like, I don't have any stories. Like, what could I, what sort of story I can tell? But I like what you mentioned about, starting the story, starting with the point. I must say, I do probably use both. Mostly I'm using stories probably that I post on my social media, and sometimes, I might film some video doing something, I don't know, like I do, for example, like surfing or acro yoga or something like this, and then I'll use it as a metaphoric example of something related to my business or something like this. And in this case, I do start from the story, and then I'll just give an example at the end as a business wise. But often it's exactly like you said. You think about what sort of point you want to come across, and then you come up with some sort of visuals for it and do the specific visuals. So obviously,
and there's no right or wrong. That's the thing. And I think the difference is, I think for entrepreneurs and for people on social media, you're generally going to start with the story. But in the corporate world, I think it's more likely that you're going to start with the point and reverse engineer. So I'm not surprised that you're more often than not potentially starting with the story.
Depends. Like it depends. If I already grabbed some great visuals, might as well to use the content.
Photo can be another thing that can prompt a story, which can then prompt the point.
Yeah, and sometimes this could be the case. But I guess coming back to the point that it's not always that easy, you know, like you get a few really good points about, you know, trying to touch all five senses for the people, you know, like trying to create this atmosphere. It can be quite challenging, you know, like actually coming up with all these descriptive components. And I probably would think a lot of people saying like, I'm just not a good storyteller, you know.
Yeah.
I'm just not good at it. I would rather just give facts and that's it. Like, you know, why would I spend time coming up with a story? So what would you say to people like that?
Yeah, that's actually a really great question. In answer to that, if you knew what I knew, and if I could tell you everything about the power of storytelling, I know you would be convinced. Storytelling is just so much more powerful than facts and figures. So you're right, it takes more effort, but there's so much more reward. So if you think about it, when you want to communicate with people, and this is, you know, whether you're having a conversation with one person really, or whether you're having a conversation with hundreds or thousands, and whether it's over virtual or in person, there's really three things that you're trying to do, at least in my mind. The first thing is you need them to understand what you're talking about, right? Like they need to relate and understand. And sometimes that's not even a given. Like sometimes people don't even get everything that you're talking about. So that's the first thing. The second thing you want to happen is that people remember what you've said, right? And ideally you want them to remember, I mean, if you want to be extremely memorable and you want to be really powerful as a presenter, you want them to remember it 5 to 10 years after you've said it. And I can recount stories from people 5 to 10 years ago. So it is possible. The third thing is that you want to then be able to influence people, right? Like there's certainly so many times, especially even at your home life, where you want to influence, right? You want people to buy into, you know, your way of things or change an outcome at work or get approval for something or funding or whatever it is. So if you think about those three aspects, so relatability, you want them to remember and you want to influence them. Stories will win out always over facts and figures. Stories are more relatable because if you think about it, what makes you relate to something, right? It's generally when someone says something, if you relate to it, you'll be thinking to yourself like, I have experienced something similar to that. Or you'll be thinking, I have felt like that before, or imagine if I felt like that. So it's connected to that experience and the feeling, and that's what's being a human is, right? Like that's the things that we have in common. That does not happen when you tell people facts and figures. It just doesn't happen. There's no physical, there's no human connection there. So stories are way more relatable and it's just easy to follow a story. It's like, I always think about a story like a bracelet. It's easy to pick up a bracelet. Imagine trying to pick up 50 beads. That's what it's like when someone gives you discrete.
Put them together,
yeah. So they're just really relatable. We've talked about the fact that they're more memorable, right? And they're also more influential. So if you think about it, like think about the last thing that you bought. Doesn't have to even be something big. I would almost guarantee the reason you bought it was a particular feeling that you get from that item. So whether it was like a beauty item.
Don't ask me.
No.
I won't go to that category because I bought a fridge.
Oh, did you?
Because now I'm stopped working, so was no feelings.
No, but actually, see, this is the thing.
No, I was feeling. Okay,
people always say that to me, right? And people have said that before, like there was no feelings in the last purchase. And I'm like, hold on a minute. Talk to me about the purchase. And this guy was like, okay, well, I bought a car and I bought it at a really cheap price. Like that was the important thing for me. There was no emotion. It's not about how I was feeling. And I was like, okay, interesting. So what does the fact that you bought it as a cheap price, why is that important to you? And he was like, well, I don't want to spend too much money on a car. And I was like, so it makes you feel good that you got a cheap price and that you're not wasting your money. And he was like, yes. And I was like, okay, so it is connected to emotion. So you may not think it's connected to emotion, but there's always some emotion tied to why you got that particular fridge.
because
right?
it fits exactly into my hole in the kitchen. It just
Exactly.
perfectly fit in it.
So
Makes
you
me
go,
happy, just like
yeah.
right
So
there,
it
and
looks,
the color of my wall, yeah.
yeah, exactly. So it looks nice. But if it had been
But I
like,
wouldn't get it if the now one wouldn't stop working. That's the only
yeah,
thing.
yeah. So anyway, yeah, everything's connected to emotion. So if you can recognize that we actually all make decisions based on emotion, then you want to give someone something that and I know this sometimes can come across like it's a little bit manipulative, but essentially you want to trigger some emotion in people, and this is not being used in a bad way. Let's just imagine that you need to get approval for something at work, or even people, you want people to buy your products and services. If they're at a state at the moment which they're unhappy and there's negative feelings associated with it, or they're frustrated, or it's taking longer than they would like, and you can there's another alternative vision for them if they take up your product or service, or if they approve this funding, where life looks better. That's where you want to connect people to, the emotion connected to those different states. And that's when you will influence people a lot more than just saying the logical facts. It's like, a great example is, think about fitness. And I don't know if you've ever bought a gym membership, or like an app. Maybe with COVID everyone's done this, but for me, if I ever see a before and after photo and it's ridiculous, and I've seen a few for Kayla, it's Cinny's or it's Signs, however you call her name, that's what sells me the product, not the fact. If she had just written up there, 7-minute workouts, you need dumbbells, you can do it at home, all the basic facts, it would never have compelled me to get it. But because there was a before and after, which is essentially a story in pictures, that's what gets you to want to buy that product. So that's what you're wanting to do essentially, just with your words.
I like that you also mentioned about influencing and manipulating. I guess we're not gonna talk about it today because I feel like it's a massive topic about where you're actually drawing the line of influencing and manipulating. And it's all, again, coming back to your emotions and emotional intelligence and empathy and all this stuff. So I feel like it's another great topic to uncover about this border of influencing and manipulating.
It's quite easy though to break that line, to say it all comes down to your intent. If your intent's good, then it's fine. If your intent's bad, it's not storytelling that's bad, it's your intent. Do you know what I mean? So yeah. I don't accept that storytelling is something that is bad. It's just, you could use it in a bad way for sure because it's so powerful, but if your intent's good, it's perfectly fine.
Yeah, it's the same as, if you're having a glass of wine in the evening because you're just enjoying a glass of wine, or you're having a glass of wine in the evening because you just hate your job.
Yeah.
It's all about it's about the intent. So I'm totally agree that majority of the time, if we're looking at something, trying to, describe something as a bad or good, it come back to the intent, 100%.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Look, coming back to, I guess, to storytelling. So let's go back to this question about, so if I don't know, like I don't have any stories, like what should I do? Like where would I start? I just feel like, my life is boring, everything the same, don't have any cool stories to share. So what would I do in this situation?
Yeah, okay. So this was me. Exactly. I did pure maths at uni. I did a cybersecurity master's. I talked in facts and figures. I felt like nothing exciting, like I hadn't been to like a war ground in Afghanistan, where I'd done something amazing, or, I hadn't had my legs chopped off, or I wasn't going to the moon. So I thought, like how many stories am I going to have to tell people? And I realized along the way, as I went through this Toastmasters Advanced Storytelling series, that in fact they don't always have to be your own. That was the number one realization. And number two realization was that little experiences can be really interesting and powerful to people. It doesn't have to be an extraordinary story. So if we go back to that slide that you were putting up there, so the ways you can source a story are, number one is your own. always going to be the best option. So if you're ever thinking about sharing a story, always try and find, is there something in my experience that highlights this, what you're wanting to get across, or shows it? So that's the first thing. And the other one that I've bundled under that option is someone else's. So if you've heard a first-hand story, or is that second-hand story, then you can share that as well. So that's option number one. The second one is a made-up story. Now, it probably doesn't sound as good as it is just like that, but what you do when you make up a story is you actually put your audience as the central characters in the story. So that's when you would say something like, Yana, I want you to imagine for a moment that you've been asked to do a presentation and you're freaking out. You know, you put your hand up, but now you're like, oh my goodness, it's tomorrow and I just don't know what I'm going to do. You know what I mean? So that's where you would take someone and make them pretend that they're in the story themselves. So that can be extremely powerful, you know, even though it might sound like, oh, a made up story, that's never going to work. So you can particularly tailor that to highlight the pain points of the current state and what the future will look like. So that's a great one to use, and you can almost use that in any situation. So that's a really, really good one to have up your sleeve. And then the third option, which is one I go to a fair bit, to be honest, and I think it also answers Sabian's question around really memorable stories or really powerful stories. I will sometimes Google something to find something really interesting. So if I think, or maybe I want to mix, and I think I've already shared a bit of a personal story in this presentation, and then I've included a hypothetical. I want a different type of story. If I have a very specific point, you know, with the internet the way that it is these days, you can Google anything, or maybe you've heard something on a podcast, or maybe you've read it in a book. That's sort of all coming under that famous examples. There's examples for everything. And so if you want to find an example for something, especially like in technology or even security industries, you can generally find something on Google. Like generally someone's written about their experience on using something before. So there should be no reason for you to think I can't share a story in this instance.
Such a great tips there, Emily, because, you know, like often I guess people will stuck at that point. They would think like, oh my God, I don't have any story, a particular story to share. But you might start with someone else's stories, and then you realize that you experience something similar. Maybe, as you said, not as not as massive, but you will realize that you can draw some comparison and find some similar examples in your life anyway. So it's I always say to people, you know, that you're doing something for ages, it feels like common sense for you, but for your audience it could be like aha moments and eye openers. So you know, boring is subjective. So you know, then every time I hear someone saying I'm just boring, it's boring for whom, you know, like
exactly.
It can be boring for one audience and you know, really interesting for others. So it depends obviously what you expert in, so what your expertise.
And again, I would say, just to reiterate, it really doesn't have to be anything particularly interesting. People just want to know, like, generally people would be far more interested to read your experience with something rather than just some facts about something. So as an example, like, you know, maybe I'm writing about meditation or something like that, and I could write some facts about meditation, or I could say, hey, I've actually tried meditation and here are some things that really worked for me, and this is what I found, and this was my journey, and this is where I ended up at, right? That's going to be way more interesting to people than me just saying meditation helps you to calm down and, you know, gives you more focus, etc. Like, that's very generic. People could read that anywhere. People really want to know your experience because that's the next best thing for them, as opposed to them experiencing it, if that makes sense. Oh, I think we've lost Yana. Okay. Well, maybe I'm not sure if it's still running, but if it is still running, then I will see if I can answer some of the stories there. The other thing that I was going to say was you need to create a story file. So if you're thinking, oh, okay, I've got those options now of like my story, someone else's story, a made up hypothetical story, or a famous story, what I would highly recommend is to create a story file. So create a story file. What do I mean by that? Yeah, I'm coming back along. Hello. I'm just explaining some of my other tips.
Keep going.
So what I was just saying was to create a story file, just following on from the previous point, so that you can capture stories when you're thinking about them, because you may walk away from this session and think, okay, great, I definitely want to start telling some more stories. I have an idea of where I can source stories from, but how do I actually start? So one of the things is grab a notebook, or if you're more a digital person, do a notes on your computer, phone, whatever it is, and start jotting down stories. So what I mean by that is start jotting down experiences in your life that have changed you, that have defined you, that have been particularly memorable, where you've learned a lot. Maybe they've been hard, maybe they've been fun, and just write out as many stories as you can remember and keep it as an active document. Because if you're going to embark on a storytelling journey, or you're wanting to tell more stories, you'll get thoughts at random times. Like I will get them, maybe in the shower or going for a walk or whatever it is. And then you need to remember to write it down, because things will come to you at really weird moments. But if you can, everyone that I know that tells a lot of stories has some sort of a story file. And then the other thing that you can do is write what type of stories you want. So let's just say you want to find, you talk a lot about, like I talk a lot about how influential stories are. So if I can find stories on how influential stories are, then I will put them in there, if that makes sense. So you sort of have both sides of that coin, of the story and the point. So if you can collate that for yourself, that's almost like having a list of recipes that you can then use. So really, really good idea. So Sabian.
Sabian, yeah, actually saying, yeah, like a content buffer.
You can fill with pieces of stories to build together. Yeah, you could think of it like that. I generally just write like a few words to describe the story, and then I will write what particular points I could make from that story, or lessons. And one thing that you will notice is one story can have multiple lessons. So I don't know if we have time, but I actually have an interesting story I could share about that particular point.
Let's just finish on your story. We obviously have a limited time today, but yeah,
it's not a long one. So hopefully this will be somewhat interesting. So because I love stories, I started to attend these sessions called the Moth Storytelling events, which, if any of you are really interested in storytelling, I would highly recommend that you go. So every month they run in major cities around the world, and every month they would pick a new topic. So let's just say maybe next month might be something like competition, and the month after might be something like resilience. Okay, so when they pick a topic, when you get there, you throw your hat in the ring if you want to tell a story, and 10 people every night will share a 5-minute true story related to that topic. And generally the audience will somehow score people, and you'll get a winner on the night. So I had been to a couple of these sessions and seen these amazing stories, and then I went to the end of year event, which is called the Story Slam, I think, the Story Grand Slam. And I sat down in this auditorium and I read through the booklet. And as I read through the booklet of who was presenting, so they essentially had all the winners from the 10 sessions in that year all competing against each other on a different theme. And what I noticed when I was flipping through the booklet was I thought I recognized some of the people, and I was like, oh, I remember that guy. And I was like, oh, I remember that woman. Yep. So I've seen a few of these people. And when they started sharing their stories, something really interesting twigged in my mind. And what I realized was that they had actually shared that exact same story in the previous session with a different theme. So they had done a really great job of taking that same experience, but explaining it in a different way, and maybe, you know, some elements were removed and some elements were highlighted, and then tying that lesson or that theme into it so well. And so, and they all did this. And so what it made me realize, and I sort of already knew this, but it really brought it home, was that one story can have so many lessons. So if you think, oh, I've only got 10 stories in my storytelling file, if you can extrapolate that and have 3 to 5 lessons, then you have 30 to 50 stories. So it's a great way to get a whole heap more stories out.
That's, Emily, that's a great example, and I can really relate to this. That made me think about one of my examples. I remember I did a video with holding 2 snakes. So I went to Sanctuary. So it was nothing related in the beginning. It was nothing related to LinkedIn or anything. But I went to Sanctuary, and someone let me hold the snake. And while I was holding one snake, they put one more snake on me, and I was like, all right, 2 snakes. And then he like, oh, do you want a third one? And he like coming to me with the third one. And I'm like, third one is a bit, too much. You know, like 2 snakes, okay. So, and it was just like my mom was doing this video because we went to Sanctuary. But then I decided I'll use it on LinkedIn because it's kind of funny video. And I posted it talking about, I think I was talking about the motivation or like stress levels, you know, like when is enough, like, are you working enough under pressure? Like how much pressure you need to perform well. And I was talking about this, but then I remember while I was thinking about what I can post with those snakes, I actually had a few ideas that I could use with the same 3 snakes.
Yes.
Now that's I guess exactly the example that you just bring in. So you can take some sort of, you know, actions and facts, but then it can be a metaphoric example to a lot of different things.
Yeah, exactly. It's like how we would go to a movie or maybe even read a book, and you might get a different message from it depending on who you are. You don't want people to come away with different thoughts. You want to make it quite clear, especially if you're in the corporate world and you want a specific outcome. That's why the lesson at the end of the story you want to make quite clear. And I'm sure, you would have made that quite clear with your particular video.
But you know, Emily, you totally inspired me to use more stories, because I must say I'm a fact person as well. And especially then I run my own webinars. I just slam it with the facts and, you know, tips and things, and usually just don't even give myself a time to tell the story. And that's one thing that I'm definitely going to change next year after this stream. I actually consciously gonna give myself time to tell a bit of the story, because I can't complain. I have plenty of stories. So I do have a lot of stories, and I'm just thinking like, oh my God, like I have all these stories and I just never been using them.
Yeah, actually a great one, just to follow on from that particular point you made, is actually when you're using a tip. So heaps of us will share tips at work, right? Maybe you're giving a presentation to, you know, mentees, or maybe you manage a team or whatever it is, even on social media. If you're giving a tip, why do you believe in that tip? You probably had some experience with it, with that topic, or maybe you learnt the hard way. So share the journey you went on to get to realizing that that tip was important, if that makes sense, rather than just that particular tip. So that's another one where it's super easy to tell a story wrapped around a tip.
Yeah, 100%. And it's probably way more effective to share like 3 tips with the stories than share 10 tips.
100%. Yes, 100%. Yep.
Michael have a comment. Hi, Michael. Here we go. uh, the comment earlier about finding stories in unexpected places. I was pruning a rose bush the other day, and I had a light bulb moment about the similarity between a rose bush and a career. I also found the more you look for stories, the easier it's to find them.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing, Michael. It's so true. Literally, I went from telling no stories, like none. I had no idea about how to captivate and engage an audience. I just thought facts and figures were the best way to go, be concise, get your point across, structure, etc. But yeah, the more you delve into storytelling, trust me, the more you're going to love stories, and the more you will find actually, oh, there's that experience, or I could just make that up and suit the particular situation, or someone's told me that, or what have you. So yeah, you will just be, I'm sure, like pinging off, with things and stories and ideas moving forward.
Yeah, I'm gonna create this file of stories now. Here we go. So guys, what was your biggest takeaway from Emily's presentations? Please share with us in the comments. As Emily have a really nice surprise for everyone as well. So I think we know who's the lucky winner today anyway.
I
But
think so.
Today, Emily is giving away a 1-hour coaching sessions about storytelling and public speaking. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about the session, Emily?
Oh, so the session is just completely open to whoever wins it and whatever they want to get out of it. So we can cover storytelling, we can cover public speaking in general. It's whatever that particular person wants to get out of it. So it's very open.
So please, guys, share with you your biggest takeaway from today's session. And I just want to briefly mention also that, as I mentioned before, this is my last show of 2020. So I'm going on a Christmas break. Yay!
Yay!
So, and the next show, the first show of 2021, will be on the 20th of January. And my guest will be Jeff Sly. He's actually have 25 years experience in television news industry. And now he started his own media consulting company. So he pretty much will be talking about how to work not only with traditional media, but actually how to control your own social media presence and actually how get your point across in a stressful situation. So that's gonna be our first show of the year. So again, 20th of January, same time, Wednesday, 5:30 p.m. And I will be slowly announcing my future guests as we moving forward. But yeah, we're starting in the month. Yes, I'm taking 4 weeks off. Here we go.
Love it.
Make sure everyone have the school holidays and stuff. So and so the Sabine's biggest takeaway I saw was about multiply lessons in the story, because I'm looking at my circular light right now, and I can think of at least 4 different meanings to describe it.
Love
Perfect.
it.
So, yeah.
Oh, no, I was just going to say it's probably no coincidence that the biggest takeaway was the one where I actually shared a story as well, which is proving the point that it's more impactful.
Perfect. So, Sabine, guess what? You're the one who's getting a takeaway today, because you obviously been the most active participant today. We have Dean pop in as well. Hey, Dean, you've been late today. And Michael here as well. Perfect. So, guys, yeah. So we need to wrap up. We almost, it's almost 6:20 now here in Melbourne. It's time to wrap up our great conversation with Emily. I still probably want to ask a few questions, but we're not going to overload you with information. So we'll finish on this on this point. And I guess, Emily, just your last advice, your top advice for everyone who's been listening.
So I would say find your own style and just try stuff out. So for me, when I was going through from wanting to tell stories to actually telling stories, I started by doing a little bit more of observing. So I would observe consciously observe people and see, are they telling a story or are they not telling a story, and how impactful is it for me? And that helped me build up a view of, it was motivation, because the more I looked into it, the more I noticed, like, oh, they could have told a story there, or they told a story and I loved it. So that, yeah, is the first thing. And then the story file would be another one. So yeah, make sure you can start collating a view of your stories, and then just test and learn. So the more you can tell stories, the more comfortable you're going to be, and the more you'll figure out your own style. So, you know, like I said, personally, I start with a point first. You might find, actually, I love starting with the story first. Or you might figure out, I don't really like telling hypothetical stories. I love telling my own stories. So just try out as much as you can and just see how people are responding and how you're finding it.
Perfect. Such a great tips today, Emily. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Okay.
I'll connect you with Sebian after this stream, so he can get his well-deserved complimentary session. And also, guys, just remind you, if you want to tell your story with the video, you know who contact for that. So, if you get your stories right and you just now need to bring them online and put them in the form of video and maybe in the form of a live stream, and you may be really scared to go live, but some people do experience it in the beginning. So obviously, contact me, you know, a bit of a self-promotion. So I do face-to-face video confidence sessions in Melbourne as well. So not only online. Now there is no COVID, yay, so we can meet actually face-to-face, and I can also film your first video for you as well. So thank you so much again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Emily, again, and I'll see everyone on the 20th of January.
Thank you for having me. Have a great Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas.
See ya.